All right, good afternoon. Glad to be here at the district office, MoDOT in Hannibal. Really appreciate everybody being here today. I want to call the Missouri Supply Chain Task Force meeting to order. I'm here with Dr. Marty Leathers, my co-chair. We're really pleased to be a part of this task force. I think it's timely that Governor Parson put the executive order in place to study these issues. They're affecting Missouri, they're affecting the Midwest, they're affecting the nation. And so it's very timely, and we've had now over 24 presentations from industry groups, from interest groups and others that have provided some really valuable information for the task force to consider. We have more presentations today. I see we're joined by task force member Mary Lamy online, so welcome, Mary, and Todd Spencer is on as well. Todd, I think you've got something covering your camera there, but that's okay. There he is. There he is. All right. I do that too, so it's good to see you, Todd. We've got some great presentations today, and a lot of focus on workforce. Dr. Leathers, thank you for bringing some of the panelists to join us today, and I'll send it over to you for any opening comments, and we'll get right into our presentations after that. We'll check with Mary and Todd as well.
Awesome, wonderful. Well, thank you. It's a pleasure to be here today. It looks like this might be one of our most well-attended ones in the public, so we're excited about that. A lot of this focus has been on the very, very important priority of understanding our infrastructure needs across the state and the opportunities for addressing some of those challenges. But all throughout, we can't do anything without thinking about the workforce component. So often it's the afterthought, but I appreciate Director McKenna, and I appreciate the governor and all members of this task force for at the beginning putting workforce kind of interwoven through this process, knowing that we're limited in what we can do from a transformational perspective if we don't have the workforce piece a part of the equation and part of this figured out. We also know that we're facing unprecedented challenges in the workforce. In state government, we have thousands of positions open. MoDOT, clearly has a number of those. We have our, hundreds of open for us. And the reality is we're all trying to figure out what this new world looks like, and part of that is, acquiring and retaining talent. And so as we think about these very massive infrastructure projects, we need humans to build them. And so it's one thing to get the money out the door for road and bridge and other types of projects, but what happens when those contracts then are delivered and then we don't have the people to lay the fiber, or we don't have the people to maintain the roads, or we don't have the people to remove the snow, right? Or the engineers to plan the bridges. These are all the things that we know that are inescapable. And so as we think about moving into this final report and these recommendations that will go to the governor and the legislator, it's very much about collectively how do we ensure success of these transformational projects, and let's do everything we can to not let workforce be something that holds us back. So I appreciate all of those that are here, and I know we're going to have some conversations of some national and state resources and priorities that are available to help with this. Todd Spencer has been a very long member of the State Workforce Development Board. Todd's background obviously here fits well too, as we've heard over the time, because of his role with the Owner Operators Independent Drivers Association. And it doesn't matter if it's a truck driver job or an engineer from ODOT. We need to fill every role. Every role is a priority, and so we want to make sure we're responsive to that. So just thank you. That's usually a longer opening salvo than I give, but as this is our last one on the road, I just want to kind of bookend what we've been doing with saying I've learned a ton. And it's very evident to me that there's a lot of great opportunity in the state, and I commend Director McKenna and everyone on the task force who are doing terrific things to advance Missouri's supply chain and infrastructure side. And on the workforce side, we have to be just as committed to meet our end of the deal.
Great. Mary, any opening comments?
Good afternoon. Appreciate the opportunity to be part of this committee, and as Marty indicated, this is one of our last sessions, and looking forward working with my counterparts and putting together recommendations and next steps.
Great. Thanks, Mary. Todd? Todd, you're on mute. There you go.
Glad to be part of the group and actually provide input where it's relevant and also receive. I think we are, as has previously been said, we're at a really unique time where there are lots of opportunities for good people to find good positions. And of course, the big challenge is matching the people with the opportunities in a manner that actually yields a long-term benefit. And that's in the interest of all of us. So, it's got a lot to do.
Great. Thanks, Todd. And being that we're in a MoDOT facility, we like to start our sessions with a safety briefing. And, great. So please.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Rob Freeze. I'm the District Planning Manager
Thanks,
for the
Rob.
Northeast District of MoDOT. Just have a few quick safety reminders for you this afternoon. In the event of a fire, we'll exit the buildings at the nearest exits. They are behind you. And we will meet up across from the visitor parking lot at the employee memorial. In case there's a small fire, Omeda has offered to go down the hallway and grab a fire extinguisher. In the event of severe weather, which is actually possible today, everyone should go to the hallway by the restrooms. And for those of you that haven't been here before, it's a square around here. So the restrooms are over there, or as you came down the stairs to your right. If we must evacuate the room, please take a moment to make a note who you're sitting next to and make sure upon arrival at the designated safe location, your neighbor has arrived safely too. If there's a medical emergency, several people in this room are certified in CPR. Linda Horn will call 911 and direct the emergency responders to our location at 1711 Highway 61 South. I volunteered to administer CPR, and Kevin James will assist if necessary. There's also an AED above us by the design department, and Chris Kelly will retrieve the AED in the event of a medical emergency. And lastly, in the event of an emergency, please do not use elevators. So that concludes today's Safety Minute. Thank you all.
Thanks, Rob. Appreciate that. Okay. So we're going to, we've got several presentations. We're going to hear from MFA, food product supply chain issues. We're going to get into national workforce priorities. Dr. Leathers is going to walk us through that. We've got some folks from our federal partners here from US DOT and to discuss DOT and Department of Labor partnerships. We're going to go through supply chain resilience and pharmaceutical stockpile efforts from one of our great companies here, AmerisourceBergen. We're going to go through supply chain and workforce challenges from General Mills and also discuss some workforce barriers. So good presentations again. This is our last of the on-the-road meetings that we have. We're in the throes of drafting the first draft of the report. I think we'll have that available probably by the end of next week for task force members to go through and to make additional changes and comments, and then we're hoping to have that out for public comment by the end of the month, early next month. So we've got a period of time for public comment, and then we can put the report together and submit to the governor and to policymakers as was the charge from the executive order. So I think we'll jump right in and ask if Krista Moss from MFA could come up and have a discussion. Thank you for being here today.
Yeah, thank you. Thanks for having me. It's a pleasure to be here today. I feel kind of weird, like, am I supposed to talk to you or over here? Presentation-wise, I don't have a lot of data per se or slides. I really want it to be a bit more of a conversation. You know, when you guys were talking today, it just strikes me again, when we say the word infrastructure, you know, that's really a large umbrella. That's really a large thing to look at. And what I'm going to talk about specifically are just, you know, as it's related to agriculture. I work for MFA Incorporated. We're cooperative. And what we do basically, supply input goods to farmers. Seed, crop protection, fertilizers. We also buy grain from farmers. Corn, wheat, soybeans. I've been with MFA since 1995, and most of my career has been spent in that space of commodities. I buy, sell fertilizer, I merchandise grain, and the one component that is common in all those things is freight, logistics. And I'm going to be specifically about logistics today. You know, I listened to this podcast in the morning. It's The Journal. I thought it was interesting. I listened to it this morning. And it was talking about Germany's reliance on Russia and their oil and the energy. And what is interesting is over the years, Germany has really not added to their infrastructure. They're only one source. There's only one road, if you will, because they thought that would go on forever. And now it's not. And they're really scrambling to find alternatives. And that's the way it is for marketing commodities and moving products around. You know, you need all the possibilities that you can get. Freight's important. We use in our system water, rail, and truck. So I'm familiar with them in that commercial capacity. And I just can tell you about some of the struggles and challenges that we see and what the future may look like. But I want to take you back to 1979. In agriculture, that's a benchmark year. We raised a lot of crop in 1979. I'm going to talk specifically about corn. In 1979, we harvested 81.4 or so million acres of corn. The average yield was 110 bushels per acre. Last year, we harvested around 85 million acres. The bushel yield was 177. So in 1979, we were at 110 bushels. Now we're average yield nationally 177. In 1979, that was about 7.9 billion bushels harvested, okay? 7.9 billion bushels harvested. Last year, we harvested 15.1 billion bushels, 15.1. If you do the math, and if you do math like a fertilizer guy like me, close enough, and you took all that extra grain and put it in a tractor trailer, in a semi, and you put those semis bumper to bumper, and they've all got that extra corn in there, how many times do you think we could go around the earth? You could go around the earth 4 times with the extra truckloads. 4 times. I want you to think about 1979. How big was the Missouri River in 1979? About the same size it is right now. We haven't added any more miles to that river. How wide was I-70? About the same size it is right now. We're talking about one commodity that has grown that much, okay? And if you can't get that grain to market, I can tell you as a merchandiser, it really doesn't have any value. You know, so that infrastructure is critical, and we've let these things erode little by little. If you take rail, we were talking about rail before the meeting. I can't say for certain, but I would guess there is less trackage in the U.S. today than there was in 1979. Sidings have eroded. There's been consolidation in the rail industry. They've done away with some things that are a little more costly. You know, they're more interested in long-haul freight, 110s, 110 car units. You know, I understand that. But little by little, it's done away with some of that freight. You know, look at the locks and dams that we have in the U.S. They haven't had much repair or care for the last 30, 40, 50 years. And we're getting to some of that. But it's important. And, you know, if you look at the rest of the world, somewhere like Brazil, that is an agricultural maybe competitor, if you will, they would love to have the kind of infrastructure that we have. They don't have anything like that. We have truck drivers that get upset if they sit 7 hours, you know, at the terminal to get unloaded. You know how long they wait in Brazil to unload a truck? A week, 7 days. They truck that stuff 1,500 miles to market because they don't have the river system or the infrastructure to support that river system. So those are things that are really critical. I think you got to look at all modes because you never know what market's going to present itself, and you need to be prepared to utilize that. You know, we're probably, with what's going on in the world right now, going to see a tremendous demand for export of grain. Do we really have the infrastructure to meet that? I don't think we do today. We'll get by, the market finds ways, but some of this inflation that we're in right now is really due to freight because the port in Los Angeles is only so big. There's only so many containers in the world to haul cargo. You know, pre-pandemic, cargo freight was 7,000 a container. At some points it was up to 20, 27,000, 30,000, you know, and there was room and margin for people to buy that in. But that's what's really ramped up and amped up some of this inflation we're seeing. It hasn't been as true for the commodities in the Midwest, right? But there is a demand. There's only so many vessels in the world too. So those are things to think about. You know, how do we do this as a state? It's really, we need to be a part of it. We need to tend after our infrastructure, you know, on the local level for the roads. We need to be mindful of what we can do on the river system to help develop that. But we also need to help promote this nation in a national sense, right? All that infrastructure is critical not to just our state's economy, but to the U.S. economy. And the thing about freight is when you go to buy a good at a store, you know, if you're buying a food product, it'll tell you how much sugar's in there, how many calories, but there's never a line to tell you how much freight is in the cost of that product. People would be amazed at how much that plays into the price of a good. If you take on a per ton basis, we'll talk about some vessel freight from North Africa to New Orleans, runs about $24 a ton, okay? That's where you can transfer on a barge. And then it can come up the river system. If you're taking product from Central Florida, some fertilizer, some phosphates, they have to put it on rail. They have to put it on a cross-Gulf vessel, move it over. That rail freight, let's just say, is $10 a ton. Their cross-Gulf rate is $24 to $25. They're $35 to $40 versus a $17 to $24 per ton equivalency just to get to New Orleans. All right, the Jones Act, the rate, the cost of rail, it all adds up. But most people don't know that. They don't trade that freight, they don't see it. Old grain merchandisers always said, we don't trade grain, we trade freight. And a lot of times that's what we're doing. We arbitrage freight and those opportunities that increase. And I can tell you from our system, the more freight options we have, it's also a risk management tool. Because I've got options and ways to liquidate that product to move it. If you're beholden to just one piece of infrastructure like Germany is to Russia, it makes it a challenge. You know, all three options, all three modes are important to us. So those are just some of the physical things, you know, and the way that at least our commodity industry looks at it from an ag perspective. And that's really what I wanted to let you guys know today and just share that with you. You have any questions?
Yeah, I have one, just kind of a comment. The way you laid out that information is really interesting, particularly when you look at the efficiency of the industry and how it's grown the output just on corn alone,
right.
Which is an amazing story here in the U.S. I think, particularly in the Midwest. But at that same time, over those same years, we actually, as a region, as a state, stopped investing in the infrastructure critical to all of those movements. Just held where we were, and some of those, you know, a series of short-term decisions that ended up becoming a 30-year cycle, really put us in an inflationary period for the price to maintain and improve the infrastructure without the resources to do it. And frankly, the infrastructure is not kept up. road, river, rail, all of that. I think probably rail's done a better job, but that's been primarily private investment than what we've done to maintain the river system to improve that, and certainly the road network with the increased freight. It's interesting that we just on the cusp of a gas tax last year, first time that we've had an increase since 1996. And that has been debated throughout this session in terms of the potential for repeal. And the policy argument is that, well, prices are high. So we have to pull that back, which would actually pull our capital program that we're planning apart by several $billions over the next couple of years. And your point about the inputs and the inflationary cost of freight, that's the driver of the price increases, and we're looking just at the price of the commodity gas, if you will, when in fact the need for that resource at the state level is to put the investment in to bring the freight costs down. So it's an interesting discussion and debate, but you find that in many cases the debate is not informed by the facts from industry. When you can see an explosion of freight just for moving corn in this region, and our infrastructure has not kept up. And never mind just being in reasonable condition, it hasn't been expanded to handle the capacity that we're dealing with right now. So I just find it an interesting component where we have these kind of very simple cause and effect actions where we're not really lining up the policy associated with that to create the advantage that our agricultural industry needs to retain the advantage over a competitor like Brazil.
That's right. And really, here's really a place where that tax, that fuel tax, that's an investment. Yeah.
That's right.
We can feel the return on that investment. Mm-hmm. That one's really more transparent than some other things that we do.
Right.
And it was disappointing that we weren't able to get that passed. We're going to have to do that going forward because it impacts everyone in a way that they don't, it's not always visible, but it's there and drives value.
Yeah.
I just want to make a comment. You said maybe rail with the private has done a better job maintaining that. They have in some ways, but what they've done is they focused on more efficient routes. And so short line, single cars, they're not in that business.
Right.
Okay, that's fine. It's a privately held business or publicly traded stock. They can do what they want, but it's forced more trucks onto the road because there's not that single car rail business. And Missouri's unique. We've got 6 rail lines in the state, right? We've got the Arkansas River that feeds our system. We've got the Missouri River. We've got the Mississippi. So, yeah, it's harder to be competitive with that freight from a rail perspective, but abandoning and moving their business away from that single car trade has had an impact on us too.
Yeah.
And again, it's not something that you wake up one day and it's all there. It's little by little these things happen.
Right.
And that's coupled with, the technology, the advancements we've made and become, more efficient and productive the way we grow crops.
Do you think that's one of the areas where the public can come in and from a standpoint of investments? We've heard this in several areas, as we're looking at trying to develop with our partners at economic development, trying to develop, mega sites for industrial capacity, manufacturing, those types of things. That short line rail connection is critical. But from the major rail companies, they're not going to make an investment in that last mile if there's not already a bona fide customer there that they already have contract in hand. Then they're going to make that investment. If we're trying to develop and to support these movements, and particularly to support the agricultural industry in the state, do you think that's an area where the state could really pick up some? We've heard that other states have some opportunity funds that very specific for developing some of those last mile rail connections. And if the state were able to take some of that capital risk away, that perhaps just the routing of the main lines once that capacity was in place, would be a lot easier.
I think it needs to be explored. I think, just as, from what I see, is when we deregulated rail and allowed them to, be free in their trade, they focused to this area and these other things occurred.
Yep.
And I think it came at a cost to the general economy that, we didn't necessarily see or feel
Right.
immediately. But I
Right.
think that somewhere there has to be a blend of that private and the public. And we've got to find whatever system that is to balance that out. And it's not just, Missouri, it's national too. I think of it a bit like, the interstate system. I mean, that's
Right.
incredible. We need to have that kind of mentality all the way through rail and barge too. Because we've got to have that connectivity to our other states as well
Right.
as to those export markets. And I don't know exactly what it would look like, but I think there needs to be that hybrid that balances out, the cost and the risk of that, but also
Right.
for the public good. I think maybe that answers it. I don't know.
Yeah, it does. Because I look at it even in the case where if you're just trying to reduce the risk, the financial risk for a private enterprise to do it, sometimes the best way to do that is through a favorable financing arrangement, that sort of thing.
Right.
So they're not at least taking on the interest rate burden. That may be something that could be subsidized at the state level. We have an infrastructure bank for, and we've rarely done anything on the rail side, but it's eligible for Title 23 and 49 investment. And that's something that we haven't seen, but it might be something that might be worth looking at, maybe even just on a pilot basis to.
And I think, but keep in mind, just because we develop that doesn't mean that they have more train power or they have more.
Right. That's right.
It's kind of like, someone builds a new port facility. All right? Well, if the infrastructure is not there, or the towboats aren't there, all those pieces
Right.
have to be there to pick that slack up too.
That's right.
It's more interconnected. It's not just about that asset or that spot. You can add more ability to, compile freight to be shipped out on rail, but if they don't have the engine power or they're already maxed out on their line, that's really not going to do you much good.
Right.
So it's a multifaceted thing that you have to do when you look at those things. And I think
Right.
sometimes we think, oh, we'll just build this facility and it will come. But it needs all the other components too. And,
Yeah.
and that's got to be looked at. And it's not easy to necessarily do that, but
Right.
we've got to be mindful of that.
Great. Any questions, Marty?
Yeah, so I appreciate the comments about, I like the data on the grain and seeing how that has certainly expanded on a different angle. So how does Missouri rank, and I know I probably should know this, but how do we rank on, the amount of bushels of corn that we're putting out there in the market every year? Are we kind of in the middle of the pack? Are we in the lead pack? Do you know where we are?
Yeah, I would say that we're lower, we don't have as much acreage that, produces like Iowa or Indiana on corn. We're significant, but it's not as significant as some other areas. We're very good at raising soybeans.
Yeah.
We're good at the quality of soybean that we raise has a high oil content, so it's desirable. But, our acreage, remember, like for MFA, just to put it in perspective, almost a third of our fertilizers go to pasture, right? We forget that grass is a crop too, and cattle, and that's important to our state. And there's infrastructure issues there as well, right?
Yep.
So I don't know if that helps answer your question.
It does, actually, because that was maybe my next thing was, if we're at, one, are we at capacity here, but what else is it that we have that gives us a comparative advantage, right, to some of the other states? And not just our location, but, what are we not getting out to market because of infrastructure? I think that's, or because of workforce. I think that's part of what we're looking at with this task force. And then I think of things, and I appreciate I think we listen to the same podcast because I appreciate your conversation around, Germany and the pipeline to Russia. Think about Europe and feeding Europe, and Ukraine was the breadbasket of Europe. And so
Right.
who's going to feed Europe now, right? And how do we play a role?
And it's not just that those bushels are out of the market, it's also where they're logistically located, right?
Right.
So you can take that off the board, that's one thing, but now you've got these logistic considerations and how you're gonna get there and what's it gonna cost. So it's not just that they're coming out of the market, it's also where they're coming out of the market.
Right.
Yeah.
Mary, Todd, any questions?
was curious what might be the greatest benefit for agriculture, investment in roads or investment in rail? And if we're talking about export cargo, crops, um, how are those shipped? Can they be shipped in containers?
So I think it depends where you are in the state. You know, we need the road infrastructure definitely in our state. We need to make improvements. We know we've been challenged with that. There is rail that could help, you know, but really right now probably focused on our water system in Missouri would be the quickest benefit that we could see. You know, more work on the Missouri River, making it more navigable year round. And then also to your question about container freight, now most of this stuff is bulk commodity. You know, it's in bulk barges, and that goes into vessels, you know, that handle bulk materials. And the thing about bulk, you know, there's so many different kinds of product. You know, that freight is usually the lowest, you know, and trades the most and has the most liquidity because you could put rock in it or sand or fertilizer or grain. So, and that's true around the world. So vessels that are bulk vessels, you know, and bulk barges, just like a hopper truck for us, it's got a lot of flexibility. So it hits a lot of different markets, if you will, to have that capacity out there. But I think the quickest thing that we can do is really focus on our river systems. And even here on the Mississippi, you know, Greg's here with me that works at our Palmyra warehouse. And to get barges up there, because, you know, with that lock, north of St. Louis is where the locks start, you know, taking those repairs, making them, you know, if it's closed for 6-7 months, that can really put a crimp on what we can do to get our fertilizer in position. It adds risks to our positions. And so I think that's an area to really to focus on, at least from an agricultural perspective.
Director,
Yep.
our audio works remotely. I wanted to make a comment. The Corps of Engineers is conducting a study to increase the reliability along the inland waterway system. So great education, and we're hoping to get some great recommendations on how to maximize the inland waterway system.
Yeah, I work with the group that it's the Missouri Protect Missouri River Coalition, and we're engaged in some of that debate, Mary, that's going on now. In fact, I had a meeting yesterday about some of that, and we'll have another one tomorrow. So as an industry, it's really interesting to be involved in that group. You don't realize how much sand, you know, and dredging gets done on the Missouri, and it's important to our, you know, our economy, rocks, roads, concrete. You know, so we're working with them to help at least get this point of view so they understand it. Yeah.
You know, I think one thing we've been able to do is think a lot on the macro level of some of these issues. And what you talked about is, you know, how do we get things to market? How do we get things out of Missouri and use our, you know, rail, water, and road? You know, for MFA, you might have a unique perspective of what about inside the state, moving things, you know, internally in the market, right? So the fertilizer, right? And so
Right.
the idea of what challenges are you having? We talk to county commissioners all the time. One of the things they say is, you know, right now there's a gravel shortage across the state apparently, and county commissioners are saying, you know, we can't spend our ARPA money because we can't get rock. Well, if we don't get rock, then you guys might not be able to get the fertilizer out, you know, into the farmland. Are you facing any of that? Do you have any, like, a local or regional perspective on getting, you know, moving things around the market here?
Yeah, our biggest challenge always is truck. And again, you know, we've got, let's just use the 120 bushel to 177 bushel. I mean, that just amplifies the issue, right? It's not just the road capacity is not larger. You know, it takes more trucks too. And we have more compressed, let me try to think of another way. If you look at a planter in 1979, you know, what were you talking about, a 6-row planter? And now, you know, you're talking about 20, 30, 40, you know, they're massive. And so the ability for that outbound has just outstripped our inbound capabilities. And one of the pressure points that we see is just enough trucks on any given day to move that product. And it goes into, you know, it's labor, it's cyclical. You know, truck freight sometimes is a tough business, and there's other times when it's pretty profitable. But day in, day out, that's our biggest challenge. Yeah.
Are there a bunch of trucks sitting idle somewhere because we don't have the drivers to fill them at the local level? I know what Todd could say, but
Yeah, I could, well, not today, it's raining, it doesn't matter, but, or it's rained since February, it feels like, but, yeah, we haul anhydrous ammonia, it's a gas, and it's specialized equipment, and so there's fewer of those trucks, right? And usually that gets to be pretty critical, because when we run, we all run, right, through the Midwest. But last fall, just to point out, CHS, a sister cooperative to the north, they had 40 trucks sitting idle because they didn't have drivers. And those are good income generating pieces of asset, right? Now, we didn't have the season where you really felt it. It wasn't that intense, but that's incredible. That's incredible. 40 drivers. We had several drivers ourselves, where we weren't able to fill the seats. We haven't felt the pain of that labor shortage just because of the way the season's played out. But I think that gives you a good example of, yes, yeah, we're feeling that.
Well, and even on that score, I was talking with a farmer this week who said his pricing for anhydrous has tripled this year, and is not typically plants corn and is not going to plant corn this year. He's going to go completely soybean, kind of at risk. But the big changes that each individual business owner has to go through when you have these wild swings in pricing. So really complicated.
Part of the reason the price is higher is because of the infrastructure issues
right.
in Europe and then the lack of natural, it's
right.
all interrelated.
Yeah.
It's all interrelated. So,
Todd's got a question. Go ahead, Todd.
Well, that was more of a comment. I noticed that your initial mention of truck drivers in your presentation was comparing a 7-hour wait for a truck driver at the elevator with a 7-day wait in Brazil. Well, look, I'm sorry for Brazil, but I wouldn't think that you'd find many people that would be excited about spending 7 hours at an elevator just to unload. So there's an infrastructure issue there too, and I don't know the reasons, but obviously, if the only way trucks can be more efficient and you can make up for some that aren't there by simply using the ones that you have more efficiently. So I don't want that just slid by without, acknowledging, make yourselves attractive to people that drive and they'll be more likely to come.
yeah, as a general rule, we don't have to wait 7 hours, but it can happen. It doesn't happen that often, and we take for granted even the level of infrastructure that we have, right. But it could be better. Right. And part of the reason that those lines get long is, again, there's only so much port capacity. There's only so much barge capacity. It still takes 6 hours to unload a barge, regardless of what year we're in.
That's right.
Sure.
That's right.
And just so you know, I actually used to drive the trucks, and I've hauled the grain, and I've spoken to elevator operators in the middle of nowhere, and there'd be a rail car there, and I'd talk to them about rail service, and they'd say, well, we never know when we're going to get a rail car, and we never know how long it's going to be here. So we better load
Some
it
things
quick
never
while it's
change.
here.
Yeah, some things
right.
never change.
Yeah.
it's that efficient market hypothesis at play, right?
That's right.
Wonderful.
Well, if there's no more questions, that's what I wanted to bring to this discussion today. I hope it's been meaningful.
It has.
That you have maybe gotten a little bit of different insight than you have through some of the other presentations. And if you've got any other questions, reach out anytime.
Okay. Chris, thank you so much. Really
Thank you.
appreciate your time. I know you're
Thanks a
busy,
lot.
so.
Thanks.
All right, take care. All right. Next up, Dr. Leathers. Thank you. Thank you, Dana.
Thank you.
Nope, I'll bring it to you, is what I was pulling. You can come here if you want, or you can stay there.
All right. Well, thanks. Again, appreciate that. I think that ties into a lot of some of the things we have heard, but it also ties into some of the challenges we know that we got to continue to figure out how to address. And I love throwing softballs at my board member. And I only have so many days to do this because he's going to retire on us. So I got to enjoy my moments while I can with Mr. Spencer. So a little bit of our conversation that I want to kind of get in today. We're getting, as Director McKenna said, we're going to start thinking about writing this plan. And part of this plan is going to be, what do we do about the labor component, right? The human capital component of all this. And so, yeah, we have a truck shortage. Yeah, we have a chassis shortage. Yeah, we have, accessibility shortages, but we also have a human problem. And so how do we work through that? Part of it is really thinking about the population dynamics that we're playing. So I want to talk a little bit about that and then talk about just nationally and at the state, what we're trying to think through as we resolve or attempt to resolve some of these challenges. So I don't have a lot of slides, but get this guy going here. There we go. So, whoop, I got crazy. Thank you. So a couple things that I want to say is that there's a lot of people thinking about this issue. So before I dive into what we're thinking about and how it's being looked at, I want to say a couple of things. One, we acknowledge that the workforce, crisis, and that's not a hyperbole, it is a crisis, but really what it is, it's a shift, right? And so I'm sure you've read the news articles, I'm sure you've felt it, I'm sure you get the phone calls. This is not something that happened yesterday. This is something that's been acute for a long time. We have over 161,000 active job openings in the state of Missouri. If we stack up every available worker with every job posting in the state of Missouri, it's about 0.7 Missourians available for every job posting. So we have fewer people, fewer humans available than we do to meet the jobs, even if we filled all of them. And so what do you do about that? We look at things like population dynamics. We say, well, there's a lot of reasons why people aren't working. One of them, the obvious stuff we're actually going to talk about later is, the barriers, right? The things that create hurdles for people accessing work or staying in work certainly are related to childcare. They're related to transportation. They're access to education, right? Those things are always going to be issues that we have to continue to resolve. But some of the things we don't think about are, what are some of the things that are working against us that we haven't addressed? Just like we haven't in the last 30 years with infrastructure issues. We haven't thought a lot about how to deal with the worker component, right? We haven't had to really worry about this. So because we haven't had to worry about this, the market hasn't resolved the problem on its own. I think many of us in economic or workforce development or education would probably be saying we've seen this coming, but it kind of exploded out of nowhere as the rebound of the economy has been so hot. And so then I also get the questions of, okay, we feel the acuteness now, how much of it is just an overheating of the market, and how, what's the actual baseline look like, right? I mean, do we really need 160,000 people to fill jobs, or, how many of those jobs might be the 7 jobs, at the local hospital that are really going to hire one person, but they know that for every one person they hire, that are really going to hire one person, but they know that for every one person they hire, they need 2 in the back because they're going to leave, right? Because of high turnover rates and things. So we know that doesn't always equate, but at the end of the day, there's 2 things that we need to understand and that are impacting workforce, and it's that, really since the year 2000, if we just want to go back 22 years, we think about the population shift, the population dynamics here in Missouri and nationally. We follow national trends. We actually are ahead of some national trends as it relates to our population. So Missouri grew in the last census by about 2.4%. You might look at that and say that sounds okay, right? It's modest growth, 2.4%, about the middle of the pack. We didn't lose. Our friends in Illinois, their population declined by about 1.7%. A lot of reasons why. But our friends in Nebraska, Minnesota, Tennessee, they grew by 5, 6, 7%. So what is it that they're doing? Why is their population growing? Well, if we break down our population dynamics, we can see that there's been a 2-decade trend of an aging population and a declining population under the age of 24. We talk about household sizes. In 1960, my parents were born, household size in Missouri is about 6. I was born in 1983, the household size was about 4. Today it's 2.51, right? And so there's nothing we can do about, solving today's hiring challenges through the birth rate, right? That's a challenge. We know nationally also we've seen, the rate of deaths actually, now the first time in U.S. record a couple months ago has exceeded, how many, the birth rate. But what we have to understand is that there's things that this is telling us that we can plan for and prepare for and be responsive to. So, as our population continues to age, we know it's kind of a misnomer to say, well, just because people are getting older, they're not going to work anymore, right? People have stayed in the workforce. There was this great resignation moment, but we've actually seen already in the last 2 labor reports a shift where a lot of people that left the market are coming back in. So maybe they chose to leave back, in the August to November timeframe, but that's already kind of beginning to kind of rebalance itself. And so we think about some people are coming back. What is it that they're willing and able to do? They're coming back, they're just doing different types of work, right? And so it's the jobs that they left that we relied upon for them. Maybe they're coming back, but maybe they're doing something different. And I think that's what we're seeing, or the type of work they're doing, meaning how many hours a week, maybe they're working, part-time, or they're doing consulting work. We've seen a lot of 1099 employees, right? A lot of those things begin to kind of come back to play, especially among the boomer population. But on the younger side, the under 24 crowd, we keep seeing, in the last decade, we had, an 8.3% decline in that age group. Now, that's still the largest size of our economy. 46% of Missourians are under the age of 24. Only 18% of Missourians are over the age of 65. And so we got that middle, right? So we still have our bell, but, we've been chipping away at that for 2 decades. And so what is it that we need to think about? And what we think about from a policy perspective is how do we help more Missourians go to work and stay in work? Because what we can't do is we can't afford people to be leaving work because it's so hard to get them back. And then they get into those political discussions about social safety net programs and benefit programs, which, yes, are part of the equation, but it's not as black and white as, you take away a benefit, someone comes back to work. We've seen that now. I think we've had about, 6 months of that in Missouri. We've had almost a year of that. We're doing better than our national partners, but it isn't it's not a magic bullet, right? It's a complex network of things that we have to consider. And so my whole argument here is one, let's just own the moment of we have a population problem, right? That our population in Missouri can't continue just to kind of happen on its own. And so what do we need to do? We need to think about domestic immigration, meaning how do we import people into Missouri from other states? I'm not going to touch the immigration outside of the U.S. That's a whole nother thing. There are some things there that economists like me will talk about, but right now we're just saying U.S. citizens coming to Missouri so that we can fill those jobs, right, and those talents. Because what we also found in a scary way was, our 44 to 54-year-olds, our population declined by 19% on that age group in the last decade, 19%. And if you look around, those are your community leaders, those are your school board members, those are your teachers, those are your managers, those are the people driving those trucks that are sitting idle, people who are probably working in the plant. And so where are they going, right? I mean, they're not working, so they're leaving the state, right? They're going elsewhere, they're doing other things. Well, why are they leaving? Well, there's probably a myriad of reasons why, but let's make sure it's not because of workforce opportunity challenges, right? Are there barriers? Because we need those individuals. And by the way, that 19%, if we look at that of our workforce, we're talking about, 380,000 people. If there was 380,000 more Missourians available to work today, that would more than solve our problem, right? So all of these things, my point is always like, this isn't the solution. This is just understanding the challenge a little bit better to think about whether you're, Northeast Missouri Regional Economic Development, you're thinking about how to make this the best place to live, the best place to work, the best place to start and grow your business. How do we think kind of in that same concept around, the quality of life and the people issue, right? And so how do we make sure that those jobs stay? Because guess what the jobs are going to do? They're going to go to where the people are. That's why we're seeing explosive growth in the Sun Belt in the Southwest. Arizona is going gangbusters. It's not because Arizona is awesome. It's because Arizona has created a place where people want to live and work, and companies are going there because there's a bunch of people, frankly, a bunch of raw material, human capital, that is available for work. And so businesses are going to go to where that is. Boeing just announced earlier today they're moving from Chicago to Arlington for their headquarters. Why? Well, one is proximity to power, of course, but the other big thing is because that's where people are flocking. Population growth in Arlington, Austin, Texas, Nashville. That's where the jobs are going to go to, right? So how do we create opportunities for people here to solve that? So we think about the human side of it, and then we think about, what that means on the infrastructure equation. How do we make sure we have the, people, driving trucks? And in previous conversations, I've said, Missouri issues between, up about 22,000 CDLs, Bs and As every year. And yet we still have a driver shortage in Missouri of, of triple that. So, why is it? Well, one, again, because, to Todd's point, people won't, it's a hard job to stay in. The other part of it is that, it's hard to recruit, and there's certain barriers, like, age is a barrier for one thing, and things like that. So we look at all this stuff and we say, what can we do about it? Well, the idea is, what are the gaps in the market that then we need to, as a public resource, step in and try to support? Part of it is increasing access to sustainable employment through training, education, so working with our K-12 and our post-secondary partners, but also working with our tech schools, but at the same time thinking about how do we work with industry better to actually resolve the problem? Because I think the other thing that isn't a popular item for me to talk about is that the U.S. trails almost every developed country in the amount of resources that companies invest in training their workforce. And so you talk to anyone from a company, and you know, I wasn't in government until I got this job. There's a lot of money that's going, you know, they're like, well, we're spending all of our time training, and it kills the productivity, you know, because with this drive for efficiency, this drive to be lean, this drive, you know, to create outcomes, we don't have time to stop. We don't have time to train. Well, that's a real thing, and that has created some challenges in Missouri. Problem is, too, we don't have a money problem when it comes to training people. We have money, we've had money, we have money that we need to get to the right places to help train the next crop of truck drivers. And we spent about $2 million to train about 600 truck drivers last year. I've easily got $5 million sitting in a federal fund to do that. We got to find the people that want to be trained in that, right? And the companies that are willing to sponsor them and hire them and keep them. So it's really a matter of bringing the pieces of the equation together. Also helping companies invest in cultivating their staff and understanding that the new environment requires not a ready, able workforce, just like, you know, you're not gonna have a site that, you know, I love the economic development stuff around, you know, ready sites. And we talk about that, even the last mile, that it's hard to do, right? Because you gotta have bona fide, you know, the same thing. We can't have ready people without employment opportunities. And so the best thing we can do is say, where are people working right now? Let's invest in those individuals and those companies to help skill them up and help make them resilient and help make them more productive. And we'll continue to create a pipeline of people. But let's focus on the 3.2 million Missourians that are working and not the 400,000 Missourians that aren't. And I think that's a policy decision that we as a state need to make and say, this is how we can begin to tackle this issue a little bit more. And Missouri, and most states, because of the way the federal funding works, has not invested, nor has the market in, you know, cultivating that resilient talent. So what do we need to do differently to be able to do that? That's really what we're focused on. So, you know, that big, you know, opening conversation here just says there's some people thinking about this. They're on the screen, you know, groups that we're working with. And anytime something like ARPA comes down or the bipartisan infrastructure plan, you know, with the $7 billion I learned the other day coming to Missouri, you know, there's groups out here trying to help cities, counties, and states figure out what to do with that, right? And, you know, I think Missouri, we're fortunate to have an administration and a governor who does get it and who has said from day one, workforce development infrastructure is a priority. And we're going to, by the way, we're going to meet our communities where they need to be met, and it's going to be a 50% match, and we're going to do everything we can. Not every state is actually out front as much as Missouri, but the key comes down to when I'm talking to regional planning associations and economic developers and county commissioners. You know, I'm a recovering county elected official myself from years ago. Like, I get it. You don't know where the workforce is. You don't know how to negotiate these Davis-Bacon contracts or any of these other things. You don't know who's going to lay the fiber because you can't get the contract in because you don't have the people. And so that's where these groups come in. So some of these national priorities are about linking resources to the people to implement the dollars, because we have the dollars available now, but how do we put them to action? You know, we have a unique opportunity for transformation. We have a lot of, I think, big goals. From the governor's agenda on down to even local level agendas of what we might be able to do with this money. But an idea on paper doesn't do us very good, right? The key is how are we going to implement that with action. And the fear is, as these dollars come, we're already seeing in the ARPA filings from in Missouri and elsewhere, but our rural counties are not using the dollars. Why? Because they're scared of it. Because it's a ton of bureaucracy and a ton of paperwork, and there's this whole fear of recapture. And two, just not having the capacity to be able to manage these projects, right? These are complex projects. And so when we think about that on the infrastructure side, it's not as simple as, here's $7 billion, let's prioritize those dollars, and let's go out and start building bridges. Well, who the heck's going to build them? Who's going to design them? And by the way, how's the money going to flow, and who's going to manage the money of that? You know, whether
We've got that covered.
We do in Missouri, but I can promise you Crawford County doesn't. Right. You know, I can promise you Phelps County doesn't, you know, or, you know, some of these other counties. I'm not going to beat up any counties in Northeast Missouri because I know that they're doing a great job. But the idea is we're all in this together, and we're only so strong as everyone else is, right? And so if any of the counties, 114 counties in Missouri, are unable to utilize and maximize these funds, then the rest of us are going to be at dismay. So what's out there to not do it ourselves? There's a lot of smart people thinking about it. You know, I have National Association of Counties tons of resources I've been helping connect county commissioners to. They're helping us also, to your point, as states figure out how to do it and figure out how can we be a resource to our community partners to help them figure out how to take advantage of these dollars. National League of Cities is also doing a lot of work. For those that want to go out and say, listen, I'm a county leader and I don't know, we're struggling, we don't know what to do. I can tell you there's webinar after webinar and there's PDF after PDF. There are a terrific amount of resources that are out there. There's smart groups like National Academy of Public Administration that I participate in. We're doing white papers on what states are doing to figure out best practices. How are they figuring out how to solve a short line program, or last mile problem in Alabama, and what might we tease out from Missouri, things like that. The National Governors Association is another big group. It's a bipartisan group of governors, and that's the next slide I'm going to talk about. They have a lot of resources also for community level individuals and leaders to be able to take advantage of and invest. So I think I'm going to advance. So like for instance, this is one related to the bipartisan infrastructure plan. And so, governors are trying to figure this out. They have really smart people like Director McKenna who are figuring out the state level. But again, how do we make sure that in 2024, when all the funds have to be obligated by that they're obligated, by 2026, when all the funds have to be spent by that they're actually spent, and by the way, all that's done in a way that we don't have to have a headline of, a county that misused funds, maybe not to their fault, but something happened, right? And now all of a sudden they're having to pay back. These are big problems that can come later through the sophistication, complexity of the problems. And so NGA is one group that I'm highlighting here that's put together a lot of resources. They've also are helping inform people like me, workforce developers and economic developers, understand how to work with our partners in transportation. Because in Missouri, again, we have we're a little spoiled, right? We have a cabinet that works together. We have a governor that said from day one, workforce development infrastructure. But some of you who've been around Missouri a while can remember previous administrations where maybe DED and DNR weren't working together, or DED and workforce, even though in the same house, weren't working together, and certainly not working with our friends at MoDOT. So how are we ensuring that we're linking these things together? I think that's part of why this task force exists, to say, listen, we support the $7 billion that the Missouri Highway Commission is going to put forward, and we're going to do everything we can in our sphere of influence to make sure those projects are successful, whether it's finding people or finding training providers or helping manage complex projects. So there's some good resources out there, and the national priority agenda is to it's about let's not miss the moment. Let's make sure that these funds can be put to positive use, because guess what? Nothing is worse than money sitting on a balance sheet. When you talk to members of the legislature or Congress, they'll be like, well, we gave you $100 billion and you haven't spent it yet, so clearly you don't need it. And so that's clearly never the case, but that's what will happen, and that's, I think, what we're going to be faced with. So how can we be actual? How can we be quick? How can we not waste the moment?
If I might,
Please.
just to add to that, a lot of what happened with IIJA was a national discussion about sending resources directly to communities, and not stopping at the state level first, which I think was kind of a bit of a frustration for many communities in the past. A lot of times what happens is you have a sub-allocation of federal funds, and the overall, whatever state agency might be administering those funds on behalf of the federal government has to apply the federal regulations in that sense. And many times, I think communities felt that was an imposition of regulation at the state level, when in fact it's a sub-allocated, sub-recipient monitoring that's going on. And so now I think rather than fixing some of that problem, the money just showed up. And you're absolutely correct that we are going to have to work together to figure this out, because we're all chasing the same resources to put infrastructure projects in place, whether it's transportation, broadband, or otherwise. So working together across the community levels, and sometimes what we can do is cost share on some of the projects that are coming up, combine resources so that something that is important to a community might be regionalized in a way that works beyond the boundaries of that community. So I think there are a lot of good opportunities, but there are a lot of challenges that we're going to face in the next couple of years implementing this as well.
I couldn't agree more, and I appreciate that help, because then I was able to realize I need to send the next speaker a link to be able to get into this meeting, because we're going to talk about just that. So, is kind of a segue, what we're starting to see, bureaucracy is bureaucracy. And I feel like every day that's half our battle is against ourselves, right? Against the bureaucracy. These dollars that are coming down from Congress in many cases are, there's multiple federal agencies, which then splinters into multiple state agencies that are having to figure out the rules, figure out the game, to be able to do this effectively. One of the things that we're going to highlight with the next speaker is that, USDOT, politics aside, right, the office of the Secretary Buttigieg, they've decided to be intentional about all the discretionary money, which is, about $500 billion, I think. They're going to write in workforce components to it. And the idea is that, they want to make sure that, and so they created an MOU with the Department of Labor to say, listen, at the federal side, and there's a page down, great timing, to say, listen, we want to work from the top to make it very intentional, and by the way, to create a model by which federally, workforce, labor, and transportation can partner, and then the states can then emulate that, and the local areas can emulate that. That's a huge, huge help for us, because often we don't know where to start. We only know where we've been and how it's always been. And so the other thing, too, is how I spend our federal funds. There's a ton of red tape and rules, and if I don't do it just perfectly, if I'm not on one leg on a Tuesday with an umbrella, I might be the guy who's having to tell the General Assembly we got to give back, $30 million that we spent wrong. And at the same time, this guy's got to trust me that if I'm saying, hey, we're going to partner and we're going to help you spend your money, that I'm going to spend it right. So he doesn't have to do that. So I think that having that cover at the federal level is really cool. So I'm excited that Paige has joined us from DC. And so her role is she's a strategic advisor for infrastructure workforce development. And this is a brand new thing. In fact, I only learned about it when I met her in person. And I'm surprised she said yes to me, because I think I was probably a thorn in her side that day. But when we were like, wow, this exists. How come nobody's told us? And of course, it was buried in a big bill. And so we learned that day. And since then, we've been able to stand up the NGA page that I just showed you, which talks about how states can utilize these resources. We have templates. But I am just, I'm grateful for the administration to see the importance of modeling the way to say, listen, as DOT, as DOL, we're going to work together. And by us working together, that's going to help empower states to do a better job of working together and communities doing a better job. So, Paige, thanks for joining us today. Can you hear us okay?
Yeah, absolutely.
Awesome, great. So we have some people in the room. This is one of our supply chain task force meetings where we're focused on workforce development and infrastructure. And so really appreciate your time today to kind of help share the information that you shared back in March and just some of the vision really for the Secretary and for the program on how workforce development and infrastructure can be tied together through terrific transformational opportunity in the Infrastructure and Jobs Act, and just things that we should consider. So in the room, you've got private sector, you've got government, you have transportation, you have workforce, you have economic development, education. So we're all kind of looking at this and saying, we're getting ready to make a bunch of decisions on where to put the money. How do we go about that? And so really appreciate your time and your wisdom today.
Great. Yeah, well, I'm happy to speak with you all, and I hope that there's going to be time for some questions and input, because what I'm going to, some of the thoughts I'm going to share are kind of an early version of what we hope to share with states more broadly. So maybe you all can give me some input on some of the gaps. Is it okay if I share a presentation? Will that work in the okay, great. I don't know that I've ever shared through WebEx, so let's see what I can do.
There should be a share button in the bottom middle of your screen.
Oh, thank you. Okay, I was doing something different, so thank you for telling me that.
Every platform is different, right? We have to learn something new every time we.
I know, right? It's like always the case. There we go. Can you all see that?
Yes, ma'am.
Yes.
Okay, great. Okay, well, Marty already introduced me, so thank you for that. I will just dive right in, and I'm assuming you all know about the infrastructure bill, so I'm not going to get into all of the details, but I do want to share a little bit about why it's important for jobs and for workforce opportunities. the bipartisan infrastructure law is expected to create millions of infrastructure jobs over the next 10 years. Infrastructure jobs are already 11% of jobs in the United States. And so we'll be adding on top of that already kind of strong base. And it's creating jobs in lots of different areas. I think people tend to think of it as just construction, but it's not construction. If you think of course, construction companies and all the different jobs they have, as well as the fact that we're making investments in transit, rail, ports. So there's lots of other types of jobs in management, logistics, information technology that are being created. It is true, however, that most of these jobs do not require a BA. And that is unique to this sector, that it tends to be a sector with lower education requirements. And despite those low education requirements, higher pay, right? So for, relatively speaking, if you're looking at jobs with similar education requirements, jobs in infrastructure pay more on average. And so that presents an opportunity to get people who do not have college degrees into good, higher paying jobs. In addition, the current workforce in infrastructure is aging and near the retirement age, especially for jobs that are very physically demanding. Retirement can be in your 40s, right? So it's an opportunity to bring people into these good paying jobs, and also an opportunity to diversify. I think a lot of people kind of know that the infrastructure workforce is not diverse, but to share a specific number. And these numbers come from Brookings. For highway maintenance and construction, those occupations, it is still 90% white and 97% male. So these are extremely segregated occupations where there is a lot of opportunity to bring in more diversity and a real need, because we do not have the overall workforce anymore where you can just draw on that same level of talent. In order to bring in more workers, this sector is going to have to bring in more diverse workers. So I think that's an important thing to recognize as we're thinking about the opportunities. So I heard Marty talking about the MOU. So I'm not sure how much I should say about it, but to take advantage of these workforce opportunities, we did create an MOU with the Department of Labor. The MOU has a couple of key parts. We see it as a way to, number one, leverage DOT's federal spending to create good jobs and to create that more diverse infrastructure workforce that I talked about. And DOL is helping us a lot think about how we do that, how it relates to our own spending from DOT. Second, it's an opportunity to align the Department of Labor funding with the needs of the infrastructure workforce. So we are actively working with the Department of Labor on that. And then third, there's a lot about partnership in this memo, and a huge part of the MOU is how we're going to work together to advise and give assistance to state and local governments. So that's why I'm here. And we are going to be doing a lot more engagement with states, cities, and others over the next few months, and hopefully we'll be producing some public materials. What we've done already is we've put workforce criteria into a lot of our grants. I'll go into that in more detail. What we are working on with DOL right now is how we can leverage the Department of Labor funding. And that's one area where, if we have time at the end, I'd love to get your input about what resources and gaps you all see from in the systems, and specifically with regard to some of what I'm going to talk about. So our grants. So DOT, a lot of the infrastructure bill is going out for formula funding. I'm sure you're all aware of that. There are competitive grants, and it's in those competitive grants where we are trying to put in place some priorities, criteria that we hope will make it so that there is more of a prepared, skilled workforce that is ready to do the work. I'm going to show you the language next, but I wanted to start off with just, what we see as the policy priorities that we're trying to encourage. And there are many. I think they're all kind of weighted fairly equally, but we can talk about that a little bit more when we look at the language. So the priorities are first, early workforce planning by project owners. We really want the project owners, which are the states, cities, transit authorities, transportation authorities that are actually bidding out the projects, to be thinking about the workforce needs. We hear different things in terms of how common that is. Certainly, there are some examples I can give you of how cities and states and counties and others have built this into their planning. The WSP and Accelerator for America just put out a playbook called the Gold Standard Workforce Development Playbook. I think that's another really good resource that has a lot about this important role of planning and how it's really, only through the bids and through the information that project owners have that everyone else can be made aware of the workforce demands that are coming. And I would say particularly in sharing that information, like for the transportation officials to share that information with the workforce side so that they know what's coming down the pipeline. So that's definitely something that we're trying to encourage and incentivize. The second is creation of good quality jobs and partnerships with unions. We do that mainly through mentioning the use of project labor agreements. You'll see that on the next page. The second is the use of registered apprenticeship. Third is investments in supportive services. And that's because we know that I'm sure that all of you who do workforce know that supportive services is what matters most for the success and retention, especially of underrepresented populations. So since we have that goal of diversifying the workforce, that's very important. And then the final one is that explicit focus on hiring of more people of color, women, and other underrepresented groups, especially through local and economic hiring preferences. Local and economic hiring preferences allow for preferencing hires from certain geographic areas or disadvantaged communities in the project. That is allowed now on all highway and transit construction projects under the infrastructure law. That's a new element in infrastructure law that it's allowed, and I'm happy to get into more details about that. And hopefully the Federal Highway Administration will be publishing a FAQ soon, because I know a lot of people have been confused about what exactly is allowable and what's not. Finally, I want to make it clear that our competitive grants can be used to support workforce development if it's related to jobs on the project. So if you look at our RAISE FAQ, for example, online, it should be in our, we have one NOFO that's out right now, Notice of Funding Opportunity that's out right now. And it should be in the FAQ for that as well, that when states, cities, others are applying for these funds, they can include in their project budget workforce expenses that are related to jobs directly on that project. It can't extend beyond jobs on the project, but anything that's related to jobs on the project, including training programs, apprenticeships, supportive services, could be included in the budget. Obviously, that takes away from the spending overall, but I did want to mention that is allowable. So what does this look like in our actual grants? This is the language that is in our current Notice of Funding Opportunity that's still out on the streets, they say. It's due May 23rd. It's the multimodal discretionary program, I think. Anyway, it's actually a NOFO that's kind of like a common application for college. So it's a common NOFO that allows you to apply for 3 different programs. That's the Mega Grants program, the Rural program, and the Infra program. So those of you who are in transportation may be familiar with some of those. So the MPDG name is just it's just a name to kind of loop all those 3 things together. So for all of those different programs, we have a priority consideration. And basically the way that this works is I have 3 different bullets here. If your project does any one of these 3 bullets, then your project is rated high in that category. These come from 2 different categories, 2 different selection criterion that are in the grant. It's not necessarily that you have to do all of these 3 things. It's really one or the other kind of gets you to the same level. And so the first one is about that high quality job creation by supporting good paying jobs, as evidenced by having a PLA, using registered apprenticeship, or having joint labor management training programs. The second is that the project results in workforce opportunities for historically underrepresented groups, such as through the use of local hire provisions or other workforce strategies that are targeted at or jointly developed with historically underrepresented groups. So pretty broad about programs that are reaching underrepresented populations. And then the third one is around including comprehensive planning and policies to promote the hiring of underrepresented populations, again, including local economic hiring, supportive services, labor management programs. But really, I think the key phrase here is investments in high quality workforce development programs with supportive services to help train, place, and retain people in good paying jobs or registered apprenticeship, right? So that's pretty open-ended. So that's what the language looks like. I wish I could tell you how it has worked in practice, but unfortunately, as I think I was hearing Marty say, this is the first time that we have had this sort of a position like mine and this sort of language in grants. And so our first application that we put this language in was RAISE. It was due April 14th. And when we release the RAISE grants later this summer, then we will have some idea of how much this did to incentivize people to address workforce issues. Yes. Was there a question? Are we allowing questions in the middle?
No, sorry, go ahead and finish. We'll get questions at the end. Thank you.
Okay. I only have 2 slides left, I promise. So I will try and keep it brief on this slide. This is, an early sort of framework of what states can do, and specifically, if you want to think about it this way, sort of what are the elements of a state workforce strategy that would support infrastructure projects. It's not meant to be sector specific, infrastructure projects across a wide range of sectors. The first is around making sure that jobs are good quality jobs that people want to enter. This is really important, right? I mean, it varies based on the geography. You don't have to make jobs in Missouri good enough that people from New York want to go and enter them, but you're going to have a hard time getting people to do some of this work if the jobs are paying the same as McDonald's. And that's something when you're working on the ground. I'm sure you all hear it too. I heard it when I was doing local workforce development work. Manufacturing jobs, construction jobs, they're hard. They're skilled labor. And if you can get the same amount of money working at a grocery store or a fast food restaurant, then it's going to make it harder to recruit people. The second is expanding apprenticeship and on-the-job training so that people have a way to enter into those jobs with very little barriers, and they can, start and get the training that they need on the job. The third is identifying what's already working and sharing that information. This is really important, especially if you want to scale quickly, understanding which community college programs, which pre-apprenticeship programs, Job Corps maybe, right, are producing people for these jobs that you could find a way to scale. And I think it's often surprising how little people know about what is working, right? And sort of, what some of the options are for quickly scaling up. That also leads into the importance of then identifying the gaps. that do exist. So fourth, creating pathways into apprenticeship and on-the-job training where there are gaps, and making sure that those are meeting all the individuals that are in your labor market where they're starting, right? So, if you have, and I'm not an expert in the local labor market, but, if you have a large refugee population, right? Do you have programs that are accessible for people who, have limited English proficiency? Do you have programs that are accessible for people who, might need some remedial math, right? So thinking about what are those different groups, especially, where we are in a tighter labor market, who is underemployed and doesn't have jobs right now, right? And how can you meet those people where they are and create on-ramps into these jobs for those populations? And then fifth, this incredibly important piece about supportive services, which is not only in the employment training, but also during apprenticeships and on-the-job training that those supportive services are needed. And then finally, putting in place accountability and incentives for hiring diversely so that you can pull from all the talent in your state, right? And that's where local hire is really important. And we've also heard a lot about kind of just setting goals and having some public accountability around meeting those goals, having public meetings, bringing all the partners to the table, and making sure that you are sharing where those goals are being met and where they're not.
Paige,
Yes.
sorry, to pause for a second. I think that Director McKinnon has a comment.
Yeah, thank you. Hey, just on that point, are any of these strategies potential for retention? I know we're talking about trying to draw people into the industry. Retention is a very important aspect for us. Just that mention of creating good quality jobs that people want to enter, and the comparison to retail. Frankly, in a lot of what is done at the state and municipal level, we're having severe issues with retention because we're not at that scale yet. So I didn't know if any of these workforce areas would enable, through the discretionary programs, the aspect of augmenting state or local resources in a way that helps retain the existing skilled workforce also.
Yeah, absolutely. That is certainly what many of these are meant to get at, especially the supportive services. I mean, I would suggest looking more at kind of where the retention problems are happening, but I know, in Washington State, where I worked before, when we did this exercise, right, a lot of this attrition happened during the apprenticeship or during the first 4 to 5 years on the job. And it was very different for different populations. Older, individuals were more likely to stay retained. White individuals were more likely to stay retained. Men were more likely to stay retained, right? And you saw saw higher attrition rates for people of color, women, especially. The tradeswomen will tell you it's not about getting people in; it's about getting them to stay, because it ends up not being a culture that is supportive, or they can't figure out childcare. So that's my experience, that a lot of that retention is addressed in the first 3 to 4 years by some of these supportive services, mentoring, networking, things like that. There's a lot of best practices I'm happy to share later about, especially on the gender front and gender equity, but certainly supportive services have been an issue across the board. Transportation actually is a huge issue. I don't know, if this is the case, in your local market, but a lot of times construction projects are not places that are, it's like you kind of have to drive your car to the middle of the highway, right? So it's not transit accessible. Like, you really have to have a car in order to have these jobs, and that can be an issue. Lots of kind of just basic kind of work around removing barriers to employment that I would say that, workforce and human service systems are very experienced in, but there are particularly hard challenges for the infrastructure sector. Again, assuming that this is a problem within the first 4 or 5 years, I think there's also probably a problem that you're going to see from people who are, who are retiring. And I don't know if that's part of what you mean by retention. And I don't know how easy that's going to be to get at.
Right. No, that's
so
helpful.
yeah,
Thank you.
Yeah.
I think, Paige, one thing I just would add to that, and sorry, we decided now to, I guess, interject. I think that as states and cities and counties compete for these new grants, right, a lot of it is not just onboarding new talent to do the new projects, but to Director McKenna's point of, we can't maintain the roads if we don't have the people. And if we're hemorrhaging talent from existing, from our existing workforce, even if we get the new grant to do the new project. So I think that so that's helpful. I just want to clarify my understanding. So, it's not just about onboarding new staff, but it also can be, your incumbent staff can be considered in these applications.
Oh, yes, absolutely. Yes, it's for any, workers on the job, whether that's about retaining people who have done the work in the past or are bringing in new people. And then, I did want to bring up my last slide, the state highway funding that can now be used for workforce. So states can now use all of their major highway funding on workforce development. So Missouri is getting $1.1 billion annually from these formula programs. A small portion of this would be a lot in workforce development terms. And the bipartisan infrastructure law specifically called out that this funding, so there was a list of things that this funding could be used for in the past, and they added to it. And some of the things that they added to it are apprenticeship, pre-apprenticeship, on-the-job training, support to community colleges and vocational schools on top of four-year universities. So previously it was only four-year universities where there could be tuition support provided. Now they've expanded that. And then activities associated with workforce training and employment services. The text goes on to say that basically this funding can be used for any activities that are addressing workforce gaps on construction projects. It is extremely broad. And so, if your gap is retention and you do a good analysis to show that, this could be addressed by, a program that, provides supportive services or helps people with transportation barriers or whatever, that could technically be funded through this. One of the elements that I think is most important, and I know is challenging for people to use a lot of discretionary funding for, is just like the sustainable sector partnership leader, right? So that is also something that you could use this funding for, right? Someone at the state level who is responsible for making sure that all those pathways onto construction jobs are mapped and understood, and that they're working, and where they're not working, right, that there are steps being taken to fill them, possibly with other resources, right? But I bring up that particular kind of leadership convening piece because I know that it's really hard to fund, especially through WIOA. But this is actually what if we have time left, what I'd love to hear from you about is your input, just, when you look at these kind of strategies that I'm talking about, where are the most resources needed, both in terms of funding and in terms of technical assistance? Again, we are actively in conversations with the Department of Labor about how we can align some of their funding with infrastructure needs, and especially thinking about what sort of discretionary grant opportunities might be available. So I'll end there.
Thanks, Paige. I'll open up to the task force members and Director McKenna here for any thoughts, and then I'll go last.
Yeah, one of the things, when we do advanced planning, we were already, we had a pretty good idea that a federal bill was coming. We worked on it at the national level for several years. We did advanced planning, and we've had a 30-year deferred maintenance on our infrastructure in the state. So, when we looked at the formula program funding that was coming, we've put 100%, even more than the federal program. We have capital planning for borrowing money. The state just passed a gas tax and this federal formula funding. We're putting all of that, 100%, into capital investment. And one of the things that is challenging for us is that a lot of the regulatory additional either requirements or opportunities are only now coming out. But we're very aggressive with we put out probably more capital projects per dollar that we receive as much as any state in the country, and it's out of necessity. So, the notion that some of that money can go to workforce planning and those other things, it's going to be all tied up in projects. So we're looking at the discretionary side of things for those opportunities. We didn't build those expectations into our capital plan. So as we do grant, whether it's RAISE or infra grant, rural grant, I think is a nice opportunity there as well. I think these are some really nice opportunities that we can work forward.
Yeah, and if I might also comment here, just don't believe anything I say today because I say I'm not going to comment and then I do. Believe everything else I say. I think that knowing that Missouri has to put everything on the table for capital projects and knowing that that cake's already baked, so to speak, puts us in a position to, I think, leverage our federal funds. I mean, Missouri pulls in $78 million a year in DOL funds across our 5 different programs. And, for those that may not know, I loved hearing the word apprenticeship every 5 seconds in her presentation because Missouri is number 2 only to California the past 3 years for the number of new registered apprenticeships and completed apprenticeships. And 41% of our apprenticeships in Missouri, by the way, are not skilled trades. So we have about 12,000 apprentices in the skilled trades, but a lot of our apprentices are in, non-skilled trade, collective bargaining type of roles, but they're quality jobs because they meet all the other aspects of registered apprenticeship, which we're really excited about. And by the way, we lead the country in public sector apprenticeships, including our good friends here at the Missouri Department of Transportation, who we support. So I think that that's going to put Missouri at a competitive advantage as we think about some of these things. And then how do I leverage the money that I'm pulling down from some of the DOL funds for apprenticeship or my WIOA money or my, these are all of our terms to help support this? I think we're in a unique spot to be able to do that because we want to be able to leverage some of those funds. And then as new money comes down in future years for DOT, then we can start writing ourselves in. I think that's a long-term cool partnership that we haven't really had the opportunity for before. And, I think it puts both of us in an opportunity to leverage our funds in new ways. Mary, did you have any comments or questions for Paige?
Other than I think you did a great job, and we continue to work with Marty's office and looking for some new creative ways to introduce, our community to these different education programs and introduce them to the manufacturing logistics industries. So excellent job. Thank you, and we enjoy working with all of you on this.
Well, Paige, thank you again. And, any other questions we can answer for you, we want to be able to support that. I commend DOT. And again, I think when we first heard about it, we were upset we didn't know about it. And now that we know about it, we're very glad that we know about it. And we're very glad that you've been working with us. And I think we're in a better position in subsequent fiscal years and with new programs to be able to do a better job of leveraging some of our resources. And so it really does do a good job of kind of bringing us to the table in ways that we may not have been motivated to do in the past.
Great. Yes. No, and continue to let us know about any gaps and, especially within registered apprenticeship as you're trying to scale that. That's one of the areas that we're really trying to think about is,
More money.
pathways into the apprenticeship. Yes, more money. Yes. But at the end of the day, you have to actually direct that money. So,
Yes, ma'am.
so maybe we can have a follow-up conversation on the details of how that money should be directed.
Well, thank you so much for your time and patience.
Thank
And
you.
we will be talking again. And I think this is the beginning of kind of a new area for us. So thank you so much.
Thank you. Thanks for having me. Bye. Actually, I have to stop sharing first, and then I
Thank you.
can leave maybe.
I'm sorry.
There we go.
Thank you. Thank you.
Great. Well, excellent presentation, and a really, as Marty said, a terrific partnership at the local, at the state, at the federal level, and it's only going to grow. Next up, we have supply chain resilience and pharmaceutical stockpile efforts. We have Marion Benz from AmerisourceBergen here, and I'd love to have you come up and right up here at the podium would be great. Thank you. Welcome.
Thank you. Thank you for having me.
Yeah.
So you may wonder why supply chain in pharmaceuticals is important to you guys, right?
Right.
But it is important because we all have, workers that need medicines. We all actually use transportation as a way of getting drugs to hospitals and to patients. So ironically, your world is really important to our world. So I just wanted to kind of create some awareness here today and share with you some of the things we're thinking about. AmerisourceBergen is a drug distributor, wholesaler, and we are kind of the middleman between the manufacturers of drugs as well into the hospitals, health systems, and physician offices. So that's a little bit about who we are. So supply chain resilience is an issue for pharmaceuticals, and you probably heard some of it on the news because there's a lot of discussion related to getting drugs from China, importation issues, and the idea of not being able to get drugs from China. But there are a lot of issues that we didn't actually ever know about until COVID. COVID created a spotlight on drug shortages like never before. They've always been around, but not so, I guess, so prevalent as they were during the pandemic. So what we consider from shortages perspective are two different types of shortages. One is supply driven. So thinking of like when a manufacturing plant goes down, or when there's, we can't get drugs in through the system, like in through some of the ports in California. Some of the trade issues, sometimes trade wars. But then there are also demand driven issues. And then those are like the surges as it relates to the pandemic. It could be a natural disaster. It could be hoarding situations. I don't know if anybody has heard about drug hoarding, but it does happen on a regular basis, especially when people are fearful. So what we are concerned about is really how do we intervene so that we can ensure that patients, whether they're your employees, they're your family members, can actually get the drugs that they need when they need them. So we really focus on making sure product is available, that there's a transparency in terms of where products are, who's doing what within the supply chain. It's a matter of national security actually as well, because we were at one point, my colleague was sitting in front of the DOD and we were talking about stockpiling. And he said, well, that's all nice. The person we were talking to was like, that's all nice, but what if China shuts down trade tomorrow? What are we going to do? Because we only keep inventory of actually a really short amount of product, up to 3 months, but generally a month to 3 months of inventory in our warehousing. So if China were to shut down, we'd all be in trouble, maybe not tomorrow, but the next day. And then we also are concerned about being overly reliant. There's probably, you may have heard about that 90% of our generics are coming from either India or China, and that's true. And actually no antibiotics are produced here in America. So it's really something that we have to think about becoming overly dependent on any one country or any one geographic area. Then there are three types of solutions we think about and I'll go into a little bit more of each of them as we go through, but, stockpiling, we think stockpiling is important because you have to have ready product available at the moment you need it. And we think that stockpiling intentional redundancy should be happening at numbers of different places and different stages. So transparency, it'd be really awesome if we could prevent any shortages from happening, any lack of product, but that's unlikely. So can we predict it and how do we respond to it? And then, the idea of domestic manufacturing, that's not just in, industry as it relates to, chips and some of the other products, but it also is related to drugs and medical supplies. So, is there an opportunity for domestic manufacturing where there's this public-private partnership between the government as well as manufacturers? So stockpiling at various levels is really important. You may have heard of the Strategic National Stockpile that happens at the federal level. And it actually was intended to respond to the chemical, biological, nuclear, and radiological threats. So basically, in the event of a war, in the event of a terroristic act, it's going to be there to respond. And that is held at the federal level agency. It exists. They never did address historically what they call emerging infectious diseases, so they weren't prepared for COVID, but they got there really quickly. And then, we're sitting in the middle in terms of we have a warehouse, although we wouldn't consider that a stockpile, but there is some responsibility at the state level. And what we see is some states do a really good job at stockpiling, but you think of stockpiling as the traditional warehouse where stuff sits on a shelf. And you think about PPE, so masks, gowns, gloves, but very few states, if any, are really focused on drugs. How do we get drugs to our patients? How do we ensure that drugs are available to our patients? And part of the problem with storing drugs are you worry about expiration dates and issues as it relates to we don't want to spend a lot of money and have products sit, and what if we never use it? What if we never need it? But there are ways that you can employ cycling techniques. You can work with distributors or manufacturers to ensure that the products actually rotate through inventory so you don't have to worry about so much product expiring if you don't use it. And then there's the hospitals and health systems. So some hospitals and health systems do a really good job of storing extra days on hand is what they call it, but some do a terrible job at it. And what we saw during the pandemic was these big health systems, they were able to kind of move product around. They were able to kind of cover for each other. But a lot of these independent, smaller hospitals, rural hospitals, think about, driving through here, coming from Kansas City, a lot of rural areas. So these smaller hospitals, they actually didn't have a backup system. They didn't have anybody they could rely on. And they struggled a lot with getting drug to the patients they need. And what we saw, I don't know if you heard in the news, but during COVID, there were patients being transferred from hospitals, one hospital to the other. They're actually being diverted from hospitals. They were actually going from state to state because they didn't have the supplies needed to be able to care for them. Supplies also included labor. I mean, nursing shortage, all of that was a big challenge. So stockpiling we think is important. It's not the end-all be-all answer though. It takes a combination of stockpiling, also transparency. So transparency, if we think about drugs, right? You think about what you probably pick up in your pharmacy or you get in your mailbox through your mail order, but there's a lot that goes into it on the upstream. And what is coming from China and India are a lot of the API and the key starting materials. So basically the ingredients that go into the drugs in order for manufacturers to make the drugs. If we don't have access to those, then that does create a lot of problems because then we can't make the drugs. Or if there are only like one or two manufacturers that are getting their supplies from all the same place, which is odd that can happen, but that can happen. We can all, like 3 competitor manufacturers can get all of their key starting materials from the exact same place. And if that one place goes down, then you see 3 manufacturers not being able to get the product that they need. So transparency is a big issue, and what we want and what I think the FDA wants and what physicians and hospitals want is to be able to see kind of every step along the way, where is that product starting from? And manufacturers are very hesitant because they think it's competitive intelligence that they don't really necessarily want to share that unless they're made to share that by the federal government. So pricing is also an issue. Everybody knows that drug prices are a little out of control. That's not like a secret, but that is something that if there were more transparency in the system, then that would also help possibly reduce the or improve the transparency and reduce the cost of the products. And then finally, domestic manufacturing. So domestic manufacturing, it's a buzz topic right now. Buy American, made in America. It's not unimportant. It's very important, but it's not. Again, it doesn't alone provide the answers. The reason we went offshoring for drugs, especially like antibiotics, is they can be made a lot less expensive over in Europe or in India and China. The labor costs are cheaper, the cost of the ingredients are cheaper, and it drives down the cost of the product. So drugs that are made overseas tend to cost less than drugs that are made here in the US. However, you do also run the risk of quality. So, their FDA doesn't have in place the ability to go in and inspect. They do go out and inspect. That throughout COVID, it was a great challenge for them. And so you saw a lot of drug manufacturers or API manufacturers or key starting material manufacturers who were never inspected by the FDA. So the quality wasn't held to the standards that needed to be held to. But here in the US, FDA does inspect regularly, and it's something that creates a higher level of quality. Risk is greater on both ends. So, the risk of drug shortages is there regardless of whether the product is made overseas or it's made here. Because factors like, if you think about Maria, if you think about the ice storm that was down in Texas and how that impacted the entire industries that were located there in Texas. So really having a diverse resourcing, diverse ability to get product is really important. When you're offshoring, product availability and access, as we saw, was extremely challenging for those that were manufactured overseas. And it wasn't just China and India, it was other countries who were doing manufacturing. When COVID hit their country, they said, wait, we don't want to send any of this product out. We want to keep it for our own citizens because we're going to need this product. So we saw a lot of countries that we had favorable trade relations with. So it's not just, those countries we don't, but those that we do, were holding back product and we weren't able to get the products that we needed. So if it were manufactured here in the US, then we'd have greater access to it. The government can put in priority orders and, make sure that that the rated orders, they're filled first and the like. So there are benefits to both offshoring as well as onshoring, and we really believe and hope that at the end of the day that we end up with a hybrid approach where there's both onshoring and offshoring, one to keep the costs down, but two to improve our security, our national security. So in summary, securing the pharmaceutical supply chain is not a one, there's no silver bullet to it. It's really something that has to take place over a number of different activities. It's not something that any one agency can do alone, but it is something that should be top of mind to everybody because we're all patients of the system. We all have family members who are patients of the system. We rely, from an employee perspective, we rely on, the Department of Transportation, the Department of Labor to get our drugs to where they need to go, to get the drug to the retail pharmacies, to get them to the hospitals. So, it's really important to us that all of the workforce stays healthy and has the ability to stay in the workforce. We want to minimize the disruptions as well as, ensure that the patients get what they need when they need it. Happy to answer any questions. I know it's maybe a different topic than usual, but
I think a really important one, though, and thank you for bringing it to our attention and to highlight this. You mentioned earlier, that with regard to domestic manufacturing, you thought there were some opportunities for public-private partnerships. Could you expand on that a little bit and let us know what your thought is there?
So the president has issued a number of executive orders that are focused on Buy American. And what he is doing, or what the administration is doing, is really trying to foster innovation through the BARDA agency and through HHS agency, and trying to basically put money behind the executive orders and say that, for any manufacturer that's willing to come to the U.S., we'll consider a partnership. The biggest thing now is advanced manufacturing, because in pharmaceuticals, they're doing batch manufacturing, so it really takes a long time for products to actually get manufacturing. Advanced manufacturing basically keeps the lines going at all times. It uses, advanced technology to do what needs to be done in order to keep supply going. But actually almost all manufacturers have said, we're not going to invest in that because we're not going to get the money back on that. So the government is also looking to partner on advanced manufacturing capabilities. And I think I certainly don't want to diss any part of the supply chain, but there are parts of the supply chain that make it harder for American companies to survive, just because they drive the prices down so low that it becomes a penny difference between a drug price. And the retail pharmacies are going to switch to the lowest cost regardless of where it's coming from. Right. So it is challenging for a manufacturer to think about coming into this space. There's a lot of news right now about the masks manufacturers and glove manufacturers who, they started up in COVID just to supply the nation, and now they're floundering, and they are closing because they cost more to make here than they do overseas.
A lot of conversation about the efficient market hypothesis today. I think that it keeps happening, which is our role, right, in public service, to be able to mitigate. I would like to make a comment, because this is relevant and it's very helpful. One of the, I think, things that Director McKinnon and I discussed with the governor's office earlier this week is that we're getting a lot of the workforce and infrastructure pieces. We're not getting a lot of the supply chain stuff, like what's happening with microchips and inventory control systems and stuff like this. We appreciate when we can hear this. And to your point, to underscore your points, a couple of years ago, we did this big economic development initiative called Best of Midwest and Talent for Tomorrow. And, we do an employer survey. And one of the things we looked at is, investments in advanced manufacturing, both on, the technological front as well as the automation front. And Missouri lags, we're like 14 out of 14 of our Midwestern peers, and late 30s of the pack. And we looked at that, and their response was really twofold. One, because the ROI is so low, it takes too long, and the market's too unstable, and we're driven towards efficiency because that's what drives us. But the other part was having a workforce that then had the right skill set to be able to take care, know how to operate that new equipment and that new machinery. So I think that, that's what you said underscores that, and it sounds like it's still a problem a couple years later. Yeah.
Well, thank you. I live in Kansas City, so what you guys do is very important to me. So I appreciate, the opportunity to speak with you all.
Well, thank you for taking the time. This is, I think you really put an exclamation on it when you mentioned that this is a national strategic priority, and it really has to be. And I'm glad that you brought this forward. It'll be a part of our report.
Awesome.
Thank you.
All right. Have a good day.
You too.
So staying in the vein of advanced manufacturing and grain and all the other stuff, I think we have a nice tie together from today's conversation with our friends from General Mills. So I'd like to invite both of you guys up, if you like, or whoever's comfortable coming up, and just hear a little bit about, some of the challenges and opportunities related to all of this stuff that you guys are facing. I mean, certainly this plant means a lot to Hannibal. It means a lot to Missouri. And, our job is to make sure that you guys can keep creating jobs and products right here in Missouri. So excited to hear from you.
I'm going to start with an apology because I've got a doctor's appointment and so that's one of the reasons why we'll tag team. So
Okay.
I'll kick us off, and then I'll hand it over to Stacy. So my name is John Comer. I'm the plant manager out there at General Mills. I represent close to 1,100 team members that make Nature Valley granola bars, all the progressive soup made in the country, Hamburger Helper and Suddenly salads. And then, again, happy Cinco de Mayo to everybody today. We also make all the Old El Paso products, so make sure you swing by the county market or Walmart on your way home and grab some Old El Paso to celebrate tonight. So anyway, we've grown a lot over the last 10 years, and I would say that the issues that everybody's brought up today are our top two. Labor by far number one, and I might kick that off and then hand it to Stacy, but also logistics. And so one of the things we measure on incoming materials and ingredients is what we call OTIF, that's on time and in full. Our fiscal year ends this month, so we've almost wrapped up a year. And when I look at the averages this year, we're averaging about 67% on time and in full. So, you know, when we talk about this isn't a Missouri issue. I just got back from a plant managers meeting last week and talking to all my peers across the nation. Obviously, these problems we're talking about are national problems, right? And so we're not immune to that. And so, like I said, we're at about 67%. And even this week, I've got 3 issues. I can't get ink that we code product with, food grade ink. I can't get inulin, which is part of the fiber that goes in a Fiber One bar. And so we're scrambling, and we're, you know, constantly changing suppliers. Over time, as we try to reduce costs, we put more and more volume into fewer suppliers to get that volume discount. And obviously, you know, they're not able to always meet that for the same reason. I think labor shortages is one of the biggest reasons. And part of it's material things too. The other thing we're struggling with right now is packaging. So cartons and they're having trouble getting fiberboard. And so, you know, like I said, we see those issues. And, you know, when it comes to the other part of the logistics side, you'd think with this trucker shortage and a shortage of equipment that we would become more efficient, right? So when we're short on inulin, I'm bringing it in from New Jersey now, and I'll bring in whatever pounds I can get just so I can keep running. We already incurred, you know, 18 hours of downtime on that this week, but again, we want to make that downtime as minimum as it can be, right? And so I've seen stuff come in with a truckload only having 3 pallets on it, right? And then when we talk about hoarding, we hoard too, is we have less confidence in our suppliers. When we can get it, we'll take it. And so if you go by my back and look at our parking lot, it's loaded with trucks. And a lot of those trucks are full of stuff because I don't have any warehouse room, because if I can get it, I get it and store it in a truck, which then ties that truck up, right? And I pay the demurrage, but it's not available to somebody else who needs it, right? And so overall, we're becoming less efficient in that as well. And then, of course, ports has been an issue. We don't get a ton of our materials and ingredients. We do try to source most of it, you know, within the states. But we do get some packaging film, some foil film that came from Japan. Twice this year, it was tied up in ports for, you know, one time as much as 30 days. So we had 30 days of downtime on one of our tortilla lines waiting for film to get released from the port. Now we're going to go to non-foil film and a poly film made in the States. So as we make that conversion again, trying to get more sourced so that we don't run into those same issues. And then lastly, I guess it would be rail. When we look at transportation, we do try to soup ways out before it cubes out on trucks. We can get 3 trucks on a rail car. And our biggest issue there is just car availability. And so we try to do 20 a week, and sometimes all we can get is 10. So that's probably our biggest issue there. On the labor side, I've never seen it worse in my 36-year career. We have a shortage of about 6% on our production team of 900, and it's even worse than that on my support team. So it doesn't matter the level of the jobs. We're at about 15% openings on my support team. When you look on that wage side, my first shift is about full, right? So I'm about 100% full there. So all that 6% is on nights. And when you can't fill it, it just forces people to work more overtime, which then you look at that resignation rate in the first year, it's higher to 50%. It's like, when am I going to get a day off? And then you guys address some of the stuff. Childcare is obviously a big issue. That's where all our 18 to 25-year-olds are working, and they're starting their families. And when you're starting your family, you don't want to spend that entire time at work, or if you're, or you might have difficulty getting childcare on that night shift. I'll let Stacy walk through a lot of the innovative stuff that we're doing. We know it has to be a partnership with you. Data, I told you guys I was at that plant manager meeting, and the data that was shared there, and actually I Googled it the other day because I was having a meeting with my team to share some of this data, because sometimes we get myopic. And my team thinks, well, it's only a Hannibal issue, or it's only a Missouri issue, and what are you doing about it? You know, it's like, guys, no, this is a lot broader than us. It's happening everywhere. But there's 11 million jobs open right now across the United States, 1 million of them in manufacturing. And our HR team shared with us at our plant managers meeting, just to let us know, it's not going to get better. Their estimates show that we're going to have 2.5 million open manufacturing jobs by 2025. And so the question is like, okay, none of us have a crystal ball, but if we're going to look at that and call it one, what are we going to do about it as a plant? And, you know, what can the state do to make sure that we're not on the average or below average side, right? But we're on the right side of that equation. And so whatever help you guys can give us on that is going to be crucial. So I'll let you walk through some of the from retiree programs to apprenticeships and all the stuff that we're trying to do.
Well, before you have to speak out, John, thank you.
you're
I mean, I think that, that summary you just gave us is absolutely some of the things that we're thinking about, both in this report, but with our broader conversations around workforce development infrastructure. So just, in case I don't get to say goodbye, thank you, and we will catch up.
All right, thanks.
Yes, more of the labor kind of stuff. So as we have been fortunate to grow in our kind of 50-year history, that also comes with challenges, right? So when I started 24 years ago, we were about 300, a plant of 300, and we've tripled in size. And really, we've done that really since 2001 when General Mills, acquired our plant. And so, we strive to be the employer of choice, but we're also, there's more competition, 24/7 operations. So most of our lines run a 12 crew, 24/7 system. And so that is challenging on nights, especially like you said, for families, who need childcare or can't find it, or just, you guys talked about the retail industry, some of the fast food restaurants, it may be a little bit less more money, but if you can work day shift, and get those hours in the same, while our total employment proposition is good, what people value is also different, especially post-pandemic. So, like John said, I've never seen it like this before. We used to be fortunate enough to have a pool of people ready to come in, and we just don't have that anymore. And so, looking at things, you don't have to have manufacturing experience. So when I started, I knew nothing about manufacturing and have been able to, be fortunate enough to do the different things that I've done in my roles, provide educational assistance and those types of things, but how we kind of market those things to people, and make sure that it's not just about dollars and cents, but what else can we provide to enrich their lives. From the support side, we see a lot of Hannibal necessarily isn't a desirable location for our younger groups who are coming in. So we try to do campus recruiting, and we've done less and less of that because we tend to lose those individuals faster because they'd rather be in a major metropolitan area, even though we're close. It's different from maybe where they went to college or some of these other things. So looking at definitely more local partnerships with our colleges, four-year things, but where we don't require a degree, looking to partner with high schools, VOTEX, career pathways for high school kids. So we've got kids here who may not want to go to college, who want to stay local. How can we help them get trained and ready to enter the workforce right after graduation? So those are some of the things. Other things we've looked at to kind of help with the shortages. So our retirees, we've done this with our mechanics and are rolling it out now in our operations group, but we're able to bring them back to the workforce with some stipulations on how that works. But that's going to provide us some flexibility either to cover staffing shortages or eventually, hopefully, provide flexibility to our operators and where they need time off and things like that, part-time schedules. So we're working through the details of that, and we'll be actually launching our operations program next month. And so it was pretty successful with mechanics, much smaller group, more specialized skills. But the ability to be able to do that is great. We partnered with a local temp agency to do a temp to hire program. So we bring in temporary associates probationary period, and if they meet that successfully, we hire them direct full time. And so these may be individuals who maybe don't have the skills, or are able to either interview well or pass assessments or get through that application process, which can be a little bit challenging sometimes. And then the other thing we're just partnering with our kind of our Minneapolis team is speed to hire is a challenge, which I know that's not necessarily maybe something you guys can help with, but our process sometimes can take, from start to finish, we're looking at probably 45 to 60 days. Where other people, can you start tomorrow, right? Some of that is, of course, legal, but other things, what can we do to make that easier or speed that up, help people with
Is that for production as well?
I would say it's slower for production, honestly.
Wow.
Yeah, so.
You said
uh,
45 to 60 day lead on
From
a
the
hire.
time they would potentially fill out an application online, take the assessment, go through the interview process, and then be able to go through contingencies, give a notice, and then start.
Yeah.
And so, some of that gets slowed down in the technology, you know, and so how do we, again, we've
Yeah.
tried to partner more with the Job Center again. We kind of pulled back from that, but, you know, partnering with them to help us with some of the resources that they have if there are technical challenges or things like that, because we have changed our process quite a bit, so it is all electronic. You used to not be able to do it on your cell phone or a tablet. You can do that now, but it still is, can be difficult to navigate through.
Do you guys hire justice-involved individuals? I think about Bowling Green being close, Vandalia not being far away.
Yeah, and we're not in a partnership per se, but through our contingencies process, we have the ability to review candidates, you know, based on background. There's things built in there, whether it's, you know, so we do that. We did not used to do that at all, so that's been another change as well. I think something else that we have kind of has come to light through my partnership with the chamber is, you know, the opportunity potentially, you know, but we don't have refugees locally, but how could we make that work in our area? In the manufacturing industry and food manufacturing particularly, there may be skills there that would match up well. But what does that look like, and what does that look like to the community? So those are some of the big challenges. I think the other thing, when you think about just skills, again, on the job training gets tough. We used to be a lot better at that, but again, we grew so quickly over the last, I would say, 3 to 5 years. The training that we're able to deliver and the way that we're able to do that, we've kind of struggled with that. And so as we've gotten bigger and more complex, you know, we've got 600 to 1,000 different unit apps that people could be working on, you know, understanding the food manufacturing process. Progresso, again, the sole source provider, so every can that is made and sold comes from our plant. But there's, you know, that's a very specific process that needs to be understood and followed to protect our consumers as well. So just thinking about how do we get that training to them, but also, you know, the open spots that are sitting there, how do we still continue to deliver on our customers as well. So like John said, we make a lot of diverse products. I don't think a lot of people maybe realize that. We don't make some of our core brands of cereal or flour, but we make Progresso soup, soft shell, hard shell, OEP. Meal side dish.
Those are all the things in my pantry.
Yep, hamburger helper, Suddenly salad, Nature Valley chewy bars. We don't make the crunchy bars, you know, and so we have been fortunate to be able to deliver to the company, and we produce about 10% of all North America retail products come from our site. So, yeah, but growing comes at a cost. Like automation, again, we're doing that now more than ever too, and it's not to reduce the amount of jobs, but it's to be more efficient in jobs that potentially, you know, repetitive motion or heavy manual lifting, hard, you know, physically, but also, you know, to be able to be efficient. But we do need people who have the technical skills to run that, or the resources to help get them trained. So those are the big things. You know, again, we talked childcare, housing, things like that. So.
Awesome, thanks. Questions from task force?
Do you find transportation issues for your workforce? Are those problematic, or are you really pretty well concentrated here? And
we do have people who drive. We
Yep.
have people who drive as far as St. Louis,
Okay.
Which is
Yep.
interesting. So we have a pretty wide range. So I don't see it as a huge issue. Sometimes, you know, people too have figured out how to ride back and forth. So not usually. The child care is usually the bigger one.
right.
So do you guys provide like access to ride share, or is it just employees figured out on their
Yeah,
own?
we currently don't in our manufacturing locations. We do, you know, in corporate, but I think if that was something that was more readily available, I definitely think we could take advantage of that. I know, you know, there's another local company in the area who has kind of started back up with providing transportation in the area. So I think part of that just, we do go a long way. So how do you figure out what that looks like or narrow that down? But we would certainly help people take advantage of that if it was available.
You know, it's an interesting comment about the trailers, you know, sitting on your back lot, that you're making a makeshift warehouse. And I'm sure Corey and the team would love to build more warehouses for everybody here. But it's the same thing. I just talked to some folks from Enterprise, and it's really hard to rent a car right now, or a van, or a utility vehicle. And that's actually now trickling down to a problem with, you know, it used to be that we'd partner with Enterprise on rideshare programs where we get a deal on vans and companies. there aren't any vans available. And so I see that now being another supply chain, problem that we're having, so.
Mary, any questions?
On behalf of the St. Louis region, we feel your pain and excellent presentation.
Great.
Well, thank you. And then I think we're going to talk more, but in Joel, and we're excited to kind of work together to support you guys on this.
All right.
Me again? Oh, boy. You guys are going to be tired of me today. I bet you don't have any more task force meetings after this, after me talking all day. Okay. It looks like we're going to talk more about barriers to employment government interventions. I think this has been the theme today, and I promise I didn't even read this slide deck, so I didn't steal any of this thunder. But Director McKenna, do you want to give any, I don't want to take anything from you on background on some of this work that was done as part of the work Cambridge is doing? Do you want to tee it up anything, or are we good?
Go right ahead.
Okay.
All right, thank you.
No problem. All right, so barriers to employment. I think we know what they are, right? I'm clicking again, too. This is dangerous. Workforce readiness. The idea is, do we have access to reliable training, right? And so we talk about access. I do think areas like the Northeast region have done a good job of working with K-12, done a very good job, working with our community college partners and their vocational training partners. We call them career tech schools here in Missouri. And so the key is capacity, right? And so I think that we are seeing a greater interest, especially among high school students, to participate in workforce readiness programs, to gain workforce credentials and certifications before they graduate high school. Kind of the same concept of dual enrollment of, for some it's about getting that college credit before you graduate, but for others it's about getting that industry recognized credential. I think we're doing a better job of it. It's capacity to be able to do more of it, because what we're seeing is a strong interest, kind of explosive growth on that side, with students being interested in participating. I think where we have challenges is for the kind of externships and the off-the-job piece, right? And so working with DESE and our partners to, go through their bureaucratic processes of understanding, is it that someone has to be in a classroom all day, or can they begin to learn how to, perform some of these job functions, at places like, General Mills and MFA and other partners. Childcare is a challenge. I mean, it's kind of a catch-22 with childcare when you think about barriers to employment. We have a shortage of childcare providers. A lot of providers went out of business during COVID. A lot of them were, small business mom and pops. A lot of, and there's a lot of provisions on, how many kids you can have, et cetera. But a lot of that was done in basements, in our subdivisions. And those individuals said, I'm out after the pandemic, and they haven't came back. And so our larger centers have challenges with attracting staff, access the child development certificate credential that you need. And then, you're competing with, these are jobs that unfortunately don't pay a lot, $11, $12 an hour. And so that, in order to attract more people to that sector, you have to increase the cost of childcare, which creates this kind of this loop of a challenge. So that's certainly there. Housing is a big deal. I won't pretend to know, the new construction starts numbers here in Northeast Missouri, but I know across the nation, across Missouri, we can't build houses quick enough. I don't know if you looked at the price of lumber lately, but that's not a good thing. It's been a challenge. And so just access and ability to even meet the demands of today with the housing growth is a challenge. And then finally, the reliable transportation. I think none of this is new, and we've talked about it pretty extensiveness. I didn't go ahead. I should have been talking through these. So some things that we have are different types of, there's a myriad of industry recognized credentials. And when we say that, it sounds like another academic term. What it just means is, does an employer think that by going through this 8-week, 6-week, 4-week program, that an individual can gain proficiency to do the job, or at least start to do the job and then continue to learn on the job, right? We talk a lot about how it's a balance between will and skill, and how we can balance those two things out. We have the individual with the right set of will, then we can meet the skills. So here's an opportunity to kind of put some skills on the table. And so there's some things here that we have, like, CDLs and CPTs, and the NCRC is a big deal. Things that we can do. For, right now we're working with a number of high schools. There's some programs even with individuals with significant barriers. The Jobs for America's Graduates Program, we are providing, access to credentials through Coursera and CompTIA. CompTIA is the IT stuff, Coursera is everything else. Just to help when you graduate high school, you might have some things that make you job ready day one, or help you get back into the market if you left as an adult. Childcare, this map tells you, it was interesting, I was in Howell County, no, I'm sorry, I was in Henry County, and this was probably about 6 months ago. I was there with the governor, and we were certifying that community as a work-ready community. And, Henry County had one, and this is like where Fayette, Missouri is, so up just northwest of Columbia, one daycare provider in the entire county. And so the population density there is like, 23, 24,000, but have one provider in a whole county just, geographically, I have to get to work at a certain time, but I got to figure out how to take this kid to daycare and this kid to, drop them off at high school. Maybe they have different times they start, and then I have to figure out how to get to work. It's a significant challenge, and this shows that. And so, trying to figure out what we can do. The other thing is just, work schedules, and I don't think schools have, and again, not to beat up on our friends at DESE, but schools have created these alternative school schedules, and I have one kid in 8th grade and one kid in 2nd grade, and they don't go to school at the same time now, which creates an issue in the morning. And then now, my kids are in Rockwood School District, now we have bus shortages to where, if you live within so many miles of the school, you don't even have a bus. And so, how do you navigate all that and get to work on time? And, we think about these things, it creates these conflicts. And so, how do we work together to kind of create more solutions instead of barriers? I think that's a lot of what it's about. We just heard from Stacy talk about, if you're working the night shift, who's going to watch your kid from 11 p.m. to, 6 a.m.? That's, it doesn't happen. And so, usually it's two parents who are working different hours. I remember growing up, Dad was in the highway patrol, Mom was a banker, and so, we wouldn't see Dad except for in the morning at breakfast, because then he was coming home from work to go to bed. And so, it's tough, but that's a lifestyle challenge for families. And now families, honestly, they can't do it because they might be on the same shift or other things. We think about housing. Looks like, okay, here are some numbers. Missouri has a shortage of 120,000 units. Again, I know all the economic developers would love to solve this tomorrow. We love residential housing. As a former county executive, we love what it does for property taxes, when we talk about things like that. But we just can't find them. And the challenges are, there is a huge gap in quality housing in that some of the housing that is subsidized housing, or the housing that has been around for a while, is aged, it's poor, and it's too expensive to upgrade it or to bring it into code in many cases. And a lot of counties, we don't even have code, we don't even have zoning. And so these create significant challenges. And so how do we have the right labor force to do it, but then to continue, we have the right amount of housing to meet the needs. And you look around, we have a lot of wonderfully historic homes that, like in Jefferson City, I think a tornado went through May 23rd of 2019, and there's still not roofs on some of these houses because there's nobody to fix it, and then you can't get through the code to do it. So again, we're making it harder for ourselves, and from a policy perspective, in some cases to allow the market to solve these problems. But at the same time, the market's also not solving these problems because they're not efficient problems to solve. So we, as a public good, have to step in and figure out how to hold the two ends together. Let's see, transportation, again. We're seeing a lot of counties, back away from providing, it used to be that you had these bills, they used to be called SB 10 bills, were basically money that was available for senior services. It would help provide subsidies at the county level for your senior centers, your Meals on Wheels programs, which took meals out, and then also like you see Oates Transportation or SMTS, depending where you're at in the state, basically senior transportation. That's how a lot of people got to the doctor's office. That's how a lot of people got to the library. And with those funds dwindling, you've seen a lot of counties not make the investments to support that. And so there's not enough, transportation opportunities. And so, that's public transit in rural areas. It's quite different, obviously, than the urban areas where we have other types of public transit. But, how are we helping people connect across an area like Northeast Missouri, where it takes hours to get, from one population center to the next? And so how do we connect our rural communities to our urban communities, and et cetera? And it's a hard thing to do. And as you can see, we don't rank very well nationally. And so how can we do a better job of of increasing that. You know, we talk about a lot of these cities from an economic development perspective. What are the cities and the counties and the areas where we like to go? We like to go where places where it's, you know, high walkability or access to public transportation, right? And so unfortunately, in a rural area like Missouri, we just don't have either of those two things. And even our two big cities don't have the, you know, the level that we need. So, you know, how is that creating more challenges for people, and how do we think about resolving that? So here are some solutions. We think about expanding housing subsidies. I mean, that's been a dirty word in Missouri, frankly, for a couple of years. You know, low-income housing, tax credits, those things are very hard politically right now to be able to understand. But, you know, the idea is, how do we create that? And how do we think about affordable housing? You know, so we're working real closely, for instance, with the Department of Corrections. We're putting our job centers, so our resource centers, in every single Missouri institution. So 6 months pre-release, we start helping individuals prepare for release through work. Part of that is home planning, not to home, but to an employer. And so the idea of employer-sponsored housing, where we're working with employers to help create subsidized housing, in some cases with a match with the employer that says, you know what, we'll put some dorms, you know, in certain areas. We'll help people home plan instead of going back to, you know, Cuba. Once I finish my time, I go to Hannibal because I'm going to work at, you know, General Mills, and there's going to be some housing that the state works with and General Mills works with, the community works with. There's things like that, as well as just, you know, I already said zoning reform and other things. You know, transportation is always an issue. We think a lot about moving goods and services, but, you know, it's highly inefficient to move people. And so that's why it is a public good. You know, we talk about market failures. That's where, you know, the market says, you know, it's not efficient enough for us to invest, and so there's going to be a gap unless the government does. And the government says, well, that's you know, that's not for us to resolve, and so we want low taxes, we want, you know, low burden, which we do, but then that leaves gaps on things like transportation. So how do we ensure there's access to reliable transportation to move our people around? You know, that is a significant workforce issue that unfortunately some states are taking advantage of, that Missouri is going to get left behind. So that's kind of it in a nutshell. You know, the other barriers I talked about was affordability to work and population dynamics. You know, these population dynamics are working against us. Affordability to work. You know, if I'm now taking a job at Taco Bell, which was what my first job was when I was 15, my parents had to sign a waiver. You know, if I'm making $15 an hour, I'm already starting to lose benefits at that point. Well, can I afford to lose some of those benefits because I have kids to take care of, or I know it's going to take me 90 days to get on my feet to be able to pay the light bill, and, you know, to do things like that. So, you know, it's not a political statement. It's we have, you know, we create policy decisions that, in one hand, we think helps more people go to work, but it actually prevents people from going to work. And those things are things that we got to understand, that it's an investment to help someone transition. And so what does that 6 months look like, so we can keep, you know, so we can reduce our turnover rates and keep people in work? The hardest thing we can do is get someone who's out of work 5 or more weeks back into the workforce. At 5 weeks, it's tough. At 9 weeks, it's damn tough. And at 12 weeks, it's impossible. And so we think about that. What are we doing upfront critically to help people get back to work? And the most, you know, expensive people to support in our economy through social services, through UI benefits, through SNAP TANF, are those who become systemically unemployed or generationally unemployed because of these barriers. And so we, you know, to kind of change the trajectory, change the cycle, we need to be very intentional. I think it's more than just either you have access to benefits or you don't, regardless of what those benefits are. And again, I think that's some of the things that we see on the workforce side that we want to think about. So happy to answer any questions.
Dr. Leathers, I think it feels like we just listened to a dissertation. No, it's good to have that expertise.
It's not boring, for sure.
No. It all ties together. You know, so many of the firms that we've heard from, labor is their number one issue right now, and that's jamming everything up for everyone across the country. And these types we know there are people out there. We've got to get them pipelined back into the workforce, and trying to remove those barriers is critical to that. So your expertise in this area is, I think, is going to round out our supply chain task force report very well. It is interesting how these issues that the governor, I think, was prescient before the pandemic and before all of these things. He came in with an administration and said, you know, workforce and infrastructure are the things that he wanted to focus on. And it's not to say that it's just a couple agencies. Every single part of government has those components in them, and kind of working together to figure these things out is critical. So just wanted to, again, open up any more questions. Mary, if you had any comments or any thoughts as we wrap up today, floor is yours if you'd like.
Marty, excellent job, and we are grateful that you are representing the state of Missouri, and obviously you work closely with our region and other regions throughout the state, so thank you for your comments.
Thanks, Mary, and thanks, Director McKenna. I think that it's been interesting for us to also to see on our side that, it's more than just about, like you said, we seem to think it's just kind of our silo of things.
Right.
And we stop thinking vertically and start thinking horizontally. That's how we can get there.
That's right. That's right. We do have an opportunity, if there are any public comments, if anybody's here that would like to offer any comments to the task force, we welcome those. All right, I see everybody looking at their phones and their shoes, so no on the public comments. I really appreciate everybody being here. This has been an interesting exercise for us, I think, and frankly, it is really encouraging to see the diversity of industry and activity that's going on in the state of Missouri. I think there's nothing but opportunity forward for us if we can figure out and solve some of these key components that help level the playing field, kind of make it more accessible, whether that's workforce or infrastructure, and to bring that forward. We have a lot of work to do as a task force over the next couple weeks, and we're going to be in draft. Well, we're in draft mode right now. I do think we'll have a draft available for the task force by the end of next week, and we've been getting a lot of feedback from task force members and others. And then again, we just think it's good practice. Wasn't laid out in the executive order, but we just think it's good practice to provide an opportunity for the public to comment on the draft report before we finalize it and submit it to the governor's team. As Dr. Leathers mentioned, we've been working with the governor's office to keep them updated. We had a meeting with them this week, and they're very interested in the results that we come up with and the recommendations that we make. So it's been really great to be out across the state. We do, by unfortunate weather, we're not able to reconnect to Springfield, so we apologize for that. But certainly, any of the companies or anything that want to submit any information to the task force would be happy to pick that up and put it in our report. So, any closing comments?
No, I don't think I can say anything better than you did. I appreciate members of the task force for their participation. I know it's been a fast sprint these last 5 months, and it's going to be an even bigger sprint the next 30-ish days as we finalize the report. But I do think this is transformation. And one thing I've always truly believed in is that there's a lot of brilliant people with a lot of ideas, but if we can't put those ideas on paper, they can't become actionable. And so I just thank the task force and the members of the public for their time to help us get these ideas on paper.
Great. I'd also like to thank Cheryl Ball, Dana Kaiser, see Linda Horn back here with our communications team. The MoDOT team, our technical team and communications that has been doing a great job on the road show. You can see all the equipment that they have with them to make these available virtually. They've really helped us, and I think helped the task force be able to participate. Everybody's busy, can't always be physically present, but being able to sign in virtually and get that information has been helpful. So thanks to the MoDOT team, really appreciate it. Todd, any closing remarks?
No, actually, today's presentations have sort of expanded the discussion about all of the things that need to kind of come together to mesh to make some of these things actually become reality. And it's a big task, a really big task, and there don't really seem to be many easy answers either. So, but I certainly enjoyed enjoyed what I heard today, and hopefully we can come up with some actionable items.
Absolutely. Thanks, everybody. And we're going to be meeting back as a task force in Jefferson City to go over the draft, but we'll do a couple work sessions and we'll work it that way, and then get the report out for public comment. We'll make that available through a press release, put it out on our website, and have it publicly available. And we thank you all for your participation, and everybody travel safe on the way home. Thank you.
Thank you.